Now I would have to present to you Mr. Alvin Blum, who has been an American Baha'i since 1936, left the United States in 1946 for New Zealand. He became a member of the NSA of Australia and New Zealand, left New Zealand in 1953 for Indian Conference, and from there pioneered to Solomon Islands, where he suffered much privations, but his sufferings have brought forth fruits, and a large number of people in Solomon Islands have become Baha'is. He was declared a Knight of Baha'u'llah by our beloved guardian. I would now present him to you to speak to you on mass conversion, please.
Mr. Chairman, beloved hands of the cause, beloved members of the International Tribunal, fellow believers, when I first received from the hands a letter advising me that I was going to be one of the speakers at this great conference, my first thought was to cable no. I do not consider myself an authority. I do not consider myself worthy to stand up before such souls that I see before me. But then I prayed and meditated, and when I thought of the early disciples of Christ, they were the humble, the halted, the blind, the weak, the insignificant people. I thought maybe there was a chance for me in this picture. And I cabled, will accept any responsibility to assure success of conference. I am a very simple and ordinary person. The Baha'i faith to me is very simple. It has to be simple, or else it has to reach the masses in a very simple manner. 6 months before I ever heard of this great message in 1936, I said, because I was on the verge of being a Gnostic, I said that if there is a God, why isn't he taking care of his people today like he did thousands of years ago? When I went to the synagogue, when I went to churches, all I heard were stories that took place thousands of years ago. What about today? Are we lost souls? And I was very hard to handle when it came to talking about religion or spiritual things. On the cornerstone of that simple statement, I accepted this revelation because when I first walked into the Englewood cabin in Englewood, New Jersey, I heard the answer to that simple statement. God has not deserted us, and he has again sent us a new teacher, a new revelator, and one who is giving us the answers for this day and age. That to me was the Baha'i faith at that time. And in around Englewood, New Jersey, the seeds for mass conversion was planted by the many wonderful believers there. I studied the faith under Philip Manigello, William DeForge, Archie Tishner, and they taught me well. I felt that I had to get out and spread this message, and I left and I went to the southern states, and I worked with Howard and Kobe Ives, whom you all know and love. Howard Ives wrote that wonderful book, Portals to Freedom, and I loved them very much because they showed me how to live the life of a Baha'i. And then one day I had a letter, and I'm sorry to bring in the personal in this talk, but that's the only way I know how to tell you about mass conversion. And if I say things, believe me, even though it is personal and in the first person, it's just to illustrate my point, and every one of you could tell the same story over and over again in every part of the world in which you come from. And I went into the American Army, and as a Baha'i I registered and ended up in the medical corps and went to New Zealand, where I stayed for 2 years and had a chance to work with the friends there, and it was a marvelous experience helping mass conversion, not necessarily in numbers, but planting the seeds which is at the verge of fruition. In the Army, I moved up through the islands, went to the Solomon Islands where I now live, but never dreamt I would come back again. Went on to the Philippines, and I want to tell you a wonderful story about mass conversion and the power that exists in this faith. You all have heard stories here how people have gone out into areas. Well, I'll tell you how the Philippines became known to the faith by a pamphlet. Lily Matthews was on a round-the-world tour, and her ship stopped there for 4 hours, and she went to the public library and asked permission to leave a pamphlet on the Baha'i faith, and it was refused. You have to get permission of the Catholic bishop. Lily didn't waste her time, so she went on to the university church, and the gentleman there was very kind, and he said, yes, you may leave this pamphlet in the section there for comparative religions. And Lily put a pamphlet with her address on it and went on back to the ship, and eventually when she got to New York, there was a letter waiting from a couple by the name of Medela, way up in the province of Nurivas, Cairo. And she sent them Baha'i books, and the faith was established without any pioneering at all through the pamphlet that Lily Matthew left in the university library. And then I pulled in 4 years later and found out from Horace Holly. I wrote Horace and asked him where the Baha'is were in the Philippines, and he told me about it. I couldn't get into the area because of the heavy fighting, but when it was cleared, I got permission to go up there and hitchhiked into this area and located the Baha'is. Everything had been wiped out, and we met out in the field, and the only thing left, they showed me a sign, was Baha'i Library, everyone welcome. That was the only thing left of the previous center that they had. And now I understand there are thousands and thousands of believers all through the Philippines. I was the first outside Baha'i they ever met. And I want to tell you an amusing story that happened to me while I was hitchhiking up to this place. A lieutenant picked me up. I was a sergeant in the medical corps. And as the usual conversation, where are you from? And he said, I come from Chicago, near the place near Wilmette. I said, oh, by the way, have you ever visited our Baha'i temple there? Yes, he said, I've been by that building 1,000 times, but I've never gone in. He said, what's it all about? I explained a wee bit about it. He said, we never talk religion home. I'm a Protestant, my wife's a Catholic, and we never mention religion. Anyway, he was very kind. He took me to where I was going, to a road, a crossroad where I could get another ride. And as I got out of the Jeep, he said to me, Sergeant, are you a minister in the Baha'i faith? And do you have any authority in the Baha'i faith? And I said, Lieutenant, and I meant every word of it. I said, no, I don't have any authority in the Baha'i faith. And I'll tell you something else, Lieutenant. If you went into the Baha'i temple in America and every seat was filled up with people and you told them you knew Alvin Blum, nobody would get up and give you a seat. That's how much authority I have in the Baha'i faith. So after I had a chance to get back up again and help the friends in this area, and then I went home and married and wrote to our beloved guardian and asked permission to go out and teach in the international field. He granted us permission to go back to New Zealand, and we went there with our 6-month-old baby girl. As you know, during the time of the Bab, during his short dispensation, the faith spread to about 2 countries. I think it was Persia, Iran, and Iraq. Under Baha'u'llah, 15 countries knew about this great revelation. Under Abdu'l-Baha, the faith spread to about 35 countries. And I don't have to tell you what happened under the direction of our beloved guardian. Through his guidance, the LSAs were formed, the NSAs were formed, the administration was strengthened. And in 1937, he issued tablets, the guardian I'm talking about, that ended up in the spiritual conquest of the South America. In 1943, he spoke about spiritual conquest of Europe. And that ended and culminated in the 4 great intercontinental conferences. And I had the privilege of going from New Zealand to this intercontinental conference, and also permission was granted to my wife and myself to come to Haifa and visit our beloved guardian. I get weak when I think that if I had let obstacles stand in my way or our way. We didn't have any money to make the trip. We had a car, we had a house, we had a business. And we sold the car and we sold the house and we sold the business and made the trip, and it was the best move we ever made in our lives. I had the privilege of being chairman of the pioneering committee at this New Delhi conference, and over 100 people came before this conference and asked permission and asked for assistance to go out and guidance to go out and teach. And there are many people here in this conference that appeared before this committee, and many of them were knights and have become knights of Baha'u'llah. A labor leader said years ago when asked what labor wanted, and his answer was more, 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 more of everything. The slogan of our committee in New Delhi was go, go, go. And these people represented a cross-section of humanity. There are housewives, businessmen, plumbers, electricians, bakers, a cross-section of humanity. And then we had a wonderful cable from the Guardian, Teach India. Just 2 words, Teach India. And we had the privilege of traveling over 4,000 miles, visiting different Baha'i centers and telling the friends as much as we could about our experiences elsewhere and about our beloved faith. But the culmination of that trip was visiting Haifa, and when the Guardian embraced me and said, "Welcome, this is your home," I felt it was my home. To pray at the shrines, to have 10 holy days there is something that we'll never forget. And we too had the privilege of standing behind the Guardian, as Mrs. Hoffman mentioned the other day, and looking over his shoulder while he put out the map that he himself had made up of the original 10-year plan, and he explained many things to us. We have 11 pages of notes from that trip, and that is a book in itself. Many people have come to me and asked, what is the secret of pioneering? The secret is sacrifice. The secret is willing to give everything of yourself. The secret is willing to be sick, be lonely, willing to cry. Give up yourself, and willing to pray for God to help. That's the secret, believe you me. You go into strange places, you're hungry, you're tired, and you're just fed up. But if you have the faith, everything works. The power of prayer, friends, is dynamic. You can't believe me what's happened. And I'm going to illustrate my point with a true story, what happened to us on the way to the Solomon Islands. We were on an old ship called the Maleta, about 1,500 tons and about 50 years old. We never get on these super-duper ships we see in the advertisements in the magazines. We don't know where they are. We can't find them in our parts of the world. And this old tub took 19 days to get from Sydney to the Solomon Islands, 2,000 miles in 19 days. Anyway, we pulled into a place called Vila. And there was Bertha Dobbins, a Knight of Baha'u'llah, lonely, tired, just the way I described pioneering, fed up, living conditions terrible, food horrible, and we brought Bertha on board to eat with us every meal. We were there for about 2 days, and she stayed on board with us as much as possible for physical and we pray spiritual subsistence. And finally the last meal, and she said it was a prayer, "My God, this has been a bit of heaven. Oh, I wish you could stay here a little longer and I can get some more of this good food." And believe me, friends, an hour later it was announced over the loudspeaker that the engine had broken down. And good old Bertha had another 3 meals. And she's still there. She's still there. There's a wonderful Baha'i school. There's Baha'is all over the place, and she had a most difficult time. There should be a book written about her experiences there. So, friends, we arrived in this old ship, the Maleta. We came into the Solomons 4 o'clock in the morning. And my wife and daughter, she was 6 years old then, we went up on the top boat deck and we said our prayers and we shouted, Ya Baha Lebha, Ya Baha Lebha. We didn't know then that the spiritual conquest of the Solomons was taking place at that moment. And I want to introduce my wife, who was with me and stood by everything that I'm telling you. She was there alongside of me. Where's people? I have a daughter somewhere. And we went ashore in a launch. The ship couldn't go into the shore. It was too dangerous. I mean, we were stood out in the open ocean and we went ashore. And we stood on the beach with our luggage around us, no taxi cabs. And a Catholic priest came along and picked us up in his utility and took us to the local hotel, a magnificent hotel of 9 rooms. Little did he realize how he was part of the spiritual conquest of this planet. And I hope and pray that a pioneering committee will be set up here by our beloved hands or the International House of Justice, because many people want to leave from this place and go pioneering. The Solomons is a British protectorate, and we have a high commissioner sent out by the Queen. It's a good government, and they're nice people. It was very difficult to make headway into the place. We had some wonderful tablets from our beloved guardian. Every time we reached the end of our tether, a wonderful tablet would come and give us that inspiration and cheer that we needed. There are 100,000 Solomon Islanders in the place, 300 Europeans, or white people as you call them here, and 500 Chinese. The guardian told us not to teach in a hurry. Make your beachhead and get your roots deep into the place, and that's what we have done. It took about 2 to 3 years before we had our first local spiritual assembly, but today we have 750 registered Baha'is and 10 local spiritual assemblies scattered all over the protectorate. I just want to give you a few little personal incidents what has happened in our little career around the world. One day, Carlos Featherstone took me to the airdrome at Adelaide after a little teaching trip in the Adelaide area, and the hostess put me next to another elderly gentleman, and we got talking, and he said, you are an American? And I said, yes. I didn't tell him I was living in the Solomons. He said, how do you like our country? Well, whatever I said was along Baha'i thought pattern, Baha'i phraseology, terminology, the oneness of mankind. They need more of a mixture of people in Australia. And he turned to me, he said, you should be a member of the Baha'i world faith. And I was never so proud when I drew myself up and I said, I happen to be a member of the Baha'i world faith. We had a wonderful talk. And then one day I got fed up. I got tired of the heat and everything and working, and I said to my wife, I'm going off to Gold Ridge. The name Solomon comes from the founder, Medea, who came in 1590, who thought that he had discovered the Solomon mines, and that's where the name Solomon comes from, Solomon Islands. And there is gold there in an area called Gold Ridge. And I went off in my best safari outfit with 6 Solomon Islanders carrying all my gear. And I went up into the mountains there carrying some Baha'i pamphlets with me, which I didn't use up there at all, because there was nobody up there to talk to about the Baha'i faith. And it rained, and I had a cot along, and I stayed in the cabin that was up there on this claim, reading Bill Sears' Thief in the Night, while my boys were down digging for gold. And they got more out of it than I did. Physical gold I'm talking about. I got the spiritual gold. Well, anyway, on the way back, I had crossed the river with my utility when the water got in and shorted the motor, and I couldn't get back. I had to stay in a village, and I walked into this village and asked the headman's permission to stay there. You always ask permission to stay in a village because that's their home, and we must be courteous. We just can't barge in and say, give me a cabin or give me a hut. And I had some extra food, and we all had a big feast, the headman and myself. We sat around, and a chap came up to me on a crutch. He said, Mr. Blum, in perfect English, tell us about the principles of the Baha'i faith. My word, he said the right thing. I said, line up the people. I got the pamphlets that I've been carrying for 6 days and never used. And that whole town, that whole area now, we have a local spiritual assembly in it. This lad who spoke to me, Stephen, he's a Baha'i. And that broke the whole area. It gave us a leg in. We had permission. We had a place to go to meet in this lad's village. And then one day, a Solomon Islander came into our home. Our home is the center, the Baha'i center in Haniara. And his name, is Hamuel. You'll read and hear about this Solomon Islander. He's the big daddy in his area. He's the spark plug in his area. He's the cause of hundreds of believers coming in. And we had prayed and hoped we could bring him here to this conference, but we couldn't work it. And Hamuel went back to a village called Hauhui. And that whole area, there's hundreds of believers all through that area. We've attracted the pagans, people that wouldn't have a thing to do with the missions. They're intelligent, they're smart, they're clever, and they know what they're doing. And we offer them nothing either. We have nothing to give them, and still they have accepted the faith. We have our renegades, if you want to call it. There are Solomon Islanders out for all they can get. Not everyone walks around with a halo over their heads, but the majority are pretty solid and know what they're doing. There's quite a bit of opposition springing up from the missions, and that's good. Hamuel wrote a strong letter about that, and I wrote him and encouraged him, and I sent the letter on to the RSA, and they in turn cabled him encouragement. They don't like what we're doing, but there's freedom of religion in the Solomons. That's backed by British law. As long as you don't do something to excite the locals, excite the Solomon Islanders to arise against the government or do something to harm themselves. And we have gained the respect of the government. So now, friends, what more can I say? The past is wonderful, the present is glorious, the future, we all have a tremendous job. We've got to establish schools in the Solomon Islanders. We've got to educate them to go out and teach themselves. We've got a lifetime job. We'll meet again maybe on this plane, maybe on the other, but whatever we do, I know we'll all be happy. We're all happy working together, and we are kissing Baha'is, and let's keep it that way because I love it.